Here's the generator on.
Yeah.
So, internet keeps going up and down, so speakers work. So if you look at that, it seems working now, and then it'll go.
All right, well, if we have folks who have ADA facility issues, we're gonna pull up a couple of chairs and we'll deal with that one. Yeah. Yeah. Some, thank you, because I didn't even like look, probably walking home. I'll have to like slide my laptop into my jump. Yeah. Yes, I'm happy to do that. Yeah. Are we worried about the speakers or the yeah.
I tried recording it, but just scared me. Had internet, didn't have internet. Slow down. So am I setting up a Zoom meeting for tomorrow?
I don't know if you got your email.
Hey Dave, what's up? I just started to look for
If you do it at night.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, they were. And so I said, saying it, I respond. If it's the night when I Zoom it.
All right.
I guess I'm Alex is moving into your old neck of the woods. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Michael told us. U-R-U-L-I-S.
Always going to understand that law school.
He is the budget.
Yeah. Well, it says he starts his second year. You know, he did his first year. So, virtual.
It's up and it's south.
Yeah, and then he,
I connected to
you know,
So, for upcoming, I tonight or another one of those,
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
I'm having a visitor that on the third. So I can't. I'm gonna hurt. I think they're working on the agenda.
he's a junior, so,
That's myself.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, about the details.
He got named for, I guess this is pretty good. He got
Oh, yes, they're gonna.
one of the top.
It's a site plan.
For
If there's no site plan,
your,
so for LPS, they're gonna.
That's pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
So they can
You
come
gotta
in.
figure it's
Right, which is site, which is.
yeah. Well, he plays on that, he plays on that, with that really high-end travel.
And then just
PGA.
Oh,
So it's pretty cool. They have to come in and submit an application to Jesus
Big
School.
Okay. That'd be good. Matching
Yes.
glasses.
He doesn't have the city of that, I mean, they're not accepting, they're not the city, they're not accepting.
But it did not call
They
me.
need to come in, the Jesus School, they're in interior
See,
renovations.
usually humans pretty good at responding.
Yes, they have that.
Because I needed the account number and everything.
And then I'm on vacation. I'm not driving 6 hours for anything. But the only application, I have 39 carried and have submitted for their contract. They're trying to push it, I'm like, what are you doing? Because they want to start construction in October, I'm like, that's not the city. So if they are complete, I'll call them, and I'll take the second, you know, I'd like to round on the second roll. That would be because then I would have to like, bring my family to speed it, and then I already what they need
Councilman? Great, okay, so we're gonna start about 1 minute, so we just want to get you on that.
It shouldn't be a tomorrow, it'll be here next month.
Yeah.
I will be here for that. And let me know, don't workplace,
We're gonna get started in about 1 minute, folks. Typically, just as a quick reminder, while we're still in the public health crisis, from COVID-19, even if you are vaccinated, since these tend to be longer meetings and we have limited ventilation here, we're gonna ask folks to keep their masks on, unless they're speaking at the podium. So I appreciate everybody being compliant here. It looks like I don't have to tell anybody here, but I wanna thank you all anyway. Okay, so Cindy, do you, I think, you know, for members of the dais, so we can communicate freely, you're fine.
Are we wearing?
No.
Oh, okay.
All right, so, with that, Cindy, would you call, the meeting to order?
Sure. This meeting's called to order at 7 o'clock, and it's being held in compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act with the annual notice advertised in the January 11th, 2021 Trenton Times. Notice was provided to the Hunter County Democrat and the Trenton Times, members on the listserv, and to department heads, the city attorney, and city engineer. The meeting agenda was posted on the bulletin board at City Hall and the city's website at www.lambertvillenj.org. This meeting provides for action items at the extent known at the time of the publication, and the meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. Can I get a roll call?
Councilwoman Lambert.
Here.
Councilman Sanders.
Here.
Councilman Sanders is on the phone. Councilman Stegman.
Here.
Council President Taylor. Here. Mayor Fall.
Here. Can I ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and remain standing for a moment of silence? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yes, everybody remain standing for a moment of silence for those who are fighting in our nation's armed forces and for those fighting on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Okay, we have a brief meeting tonight, not a ton on the agenda.
I'm gonna start with, meeting minutes, and then we have a couple of, sort of general ordinances. The bulk of the meeting tonight will be discussing our, cannabis, ordinance, which Councilman Sanders has been working on, so he'll introduce that to everyone as we move along the meeting. So first, can I get a motion to approve the following sets of meeting minutes? May 20th, open and closed session, May 25th, 2021, open and closed session, June 1st, 2021, open and closed session, June 24th, voting session,
Or not July 27th.
They're not quite ready?
No.
Okay. So May 20th, May 25th, and June 1st.
So moved.
I'll take Councilwoman Lambert for the first, Councilwoman Taylor for the second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. We now have, some resolutions that are on our consent agenda. Are there any questions from the council regarding any of these resolutions? Hearing none, I just want to flag for everybody here that there is a resolution about, the authorization of the road closure for the annual Animal Alliance Pet Masquerade, which we had to cancel last year because of COVID-19, and I'm looking forward to attending. Okay, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda for number 93, 94, 97, 100, and 101?
Second.
Councilwoman Taylor for the first, Councilwoman Lambert for the second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, we've got ordinance number 16, 2021. This is an ordinance on first reading regarding, actually, Councilman Sanders, do you mind if we quickly do our second reading ordinance, just because it's a handicap parking space?
No, go ahead.
We're gonna move to ordinance number 14, 2021. This is an ordinance to amend the Lambertville City Code, the Lambertville City Code 2014, Chapter 12, Section 4.7, parking restricted for use by handicapped persons, to add a handicap parking space in front of 43 Elm Street on the south side, at the dead end of Swan Street by the water company on 40th South Union. Are there any questions from the council before we open for public hearing? Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna open for any comments from the public. All right, can I get a motion to close the public hearing? Thank you, Councilman.
Second.
Thank you, Council President. Can I get a, just an all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Okay. And ordinance number 15, this is an ordinance to amend the zoning map 2015. This is just some cleanup legislation from,
Get the vote to adopt.
oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, can I get a motion, to pass ordinance number 14, 2021?
So moved.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second. Can I get a roll call vote?
Councilwoman Lambert?
Yes.
Councilman Sanders?
Yes.
Councilman Stegman?
Yes.
Council President Taylor?
Yes.
Mayor Paul?
Yes. Okay, ordinance number 15, 2021. This is an ordinance to amend the zoning map 2015. This is just an amendment to the zoning map to reflect changes we made in 2020. Are there any questions or comments from the council?
Yeah, I have a question just to clarify on, 301 for I think that's for the police station. This is just basically housekeeping, correct?
Correct.
Like all of the actions have already been taken.
We amended the zoning map last year.
Right.
This is just an ordinance to formally amend it. It's just,
Right, so
this is house.
there's nothing to not do, is that's kind of what I'm saying. You don't undo anything.
No, this is not policy. This is just to ensure that our zoning map actually reflects the zoning changes we already made.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I have a question now that I didn't have before. This entire ordinance has nothing to do with the police station, it's all about the flag lot, so why
We're amending our, the entire zoning map. There were multiple amendments that were made that weren't reflected from 2020. It was functionally clerical error that it wasn't amended in 2020, so we're fixing multiple, clerical fixes.
City planner has her hand up.
Excuse me, you're just saying we're bundling them, these.
Yeah, these are, again, we are just amending the zoning map to ensure that zoning changes that have already been made get reflected.
Okay.
Well, if there are further questions, I'll call on Emily, I promise.
I guess my question is, and maybe Cindy, this is a question for you, the whole text of the ordinance has nothing to do with any other change.
No, it does not. It's an application that was made to planning board to subdivide.
Right.
And the property went from Bridge Street to Ferry Street, and when they subdivided, now it's an opportunity to put the Ferry Street in residential, and I believe the Bridge Street side in the CBD. That's all it does. It's one property.
Right, so why are we talking about the police station?
Okay, Emily, would you mind coming up here?
So section 301 is literally just to identify changes that are made to the zoning map. Every time the zoning maps change, this just keeps a record of those changes. So back in December, the city adopted the redevelopment plan for the police station site that effectuated a change to the zoning map. In the ordinance that adopted that redevelopment plan, this section wasn't changed in that ordinance. So this is just cleanup to add the note to identify that the zoning map was changed for that zone change as part of the redevelopment plan. Because the prior ones identified zoning for the Stromfells, for the overlays, for the Lambertville High School redevelopment area. So it really is just a cleanup. It's not changing the zoning, it's just keeping track of the changes to the zoning map.
So just as a follow-up, Emily, what would be the consequence of not doing this? Okay, so if this was not on the agenda tonight, what's the impact to us?
So the impact, is really this zone change is really, for those two lots on Bridge and Ferry Street right now. They're through an application where they re-subdivided the lot, so now one lot fully has frontage on Bridge Street, one lot has full frontage on Ferry Street. The lot that previously, or has frontage on Ferry Street had a flagpole that reached out to Bridge Street. When the city did a rezoning to clean up the zoning between the Central Business District and R2 zone between Bridge and Ferry, in the past, we followed lot lines. Based on the new application that they just got approved from the planning board, they would have created a split zone lot. So this is a corrective measure for those two lots to really fix that split zoning. I added the police station redevelopment zone as a note because, again, that's reflecting the change that already occurred that wasn't in the section of the zoning ordinance.
So my question is,
If
what happens if we never did this? Like,
So if council does not adopt this
Yeah.
ordinance, then the lots that front on Bridge Street and Ferry Street will have split zoning, and their planning board approval is null and void. So that they would have to go and actually apply to the zoning board instead for use variance relief based on the use permitted in the zone.
And what about the other two items, the bond zoning, rezoning, and the police? What's the consequence of not acting on those?
The city just wouldn't have a record, identifying the change to the zone map that's already been adopted for the police station. And for 6, for the Vaughn rezoning, again, that would be, the site would still result in that split lot zoning, which means the planning board approval they just received would become null and void as that getting this rezoning is a condition of that approval. And otherwise they have to review, zoning board for use variance.
Thank you.
Any further questions from the council?
I have one question there's been a lot of work done on that property at 51 Bridge. Should that have been done before we adopted the zoning?
Probably not.
Councilman, I can follow up on that question.
Yes, please.
The construction office was aware that they had begun construction, and since this ordinance was we felt was a formality, and they are under a tight timeline because of their construction office. They have all of their current COs and could begin construction. And when we heard that there was concerns about the material they were using, we issued a stop order, checked on the work, they were doing that work within the bounds of the resolution. Sure. Any other questions? Okay, can I, get a motion, or I guess I'll open up for general public comment? Hearing none, can I, get a motion to close public comment for, the ordinance number 15? Second. Excellent. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can I get a motion to adopt on second reading ordinance number 15, 2021?
So moved. Second.
Okay, can I get a roll call
Councilwoman Lambert?
Since it appears that there is, consequence to the, zone, or the lots on, Bridge and Ferry Streets, and no real consequence to, well, and also the Vaughn rezoning, and no real consequence to what's happened with the police site, I'm voting yes.
Councilman Sanders?
Yes.
Councilman Stegman?
Yes.
Council President Taylor?
Yes.
Mayor Paul?
Yes. Okay, we'll go back now to, on first reading, or a discussion rather, excuse me. One second. The ordinance on first reading number 16, this is an ordinance of the city of Lambertville in the county of Hunterdon, New Jersey, creating chapter 16 of the Lambertville City Code 2014, entitled Cannabis, and amending in the land use regulations to permit the operation of class 5 cannabis retailer, cannabis licensed establishments within the city, and amending chapter 15 to establish a cannabis transfer tax. Councilman Sanders, do you mind if I kick that over to you?
Sure. I want to make, first of all, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we're getting a lot of nods.
Okay, that's great. That's terrific. And first, I do want to apologize. I had missed very few meetings in my many years on council, but I had planned to be away. I was expecting we would have Zoom capabilities with the change in the public health and the state of emergency orders. I recommend a change here, but I am out of town, but I appreciate the opportunity to call in and apologize that I couldn't be there, especially to talk about this, because this has been a very interesting project. So just to provide a little background, and Mayor or somebody else, please chime in if for some reason I can't be heard or it's a little hard to hear. We originally, like a vast majority of towns, looked to pass a ban on all cannabis businesses before the state's August 22nd deadline. And I know that some towns were banning because they truly wanted to ban, but others were doing it really for two reasons. One, to preserve rights to get in before that timing deadline, and really to buy some additional time. And that was really our intent when we took the suggestion from the League of Municipalities and had on our agenda a proposal to ban all those. It was with the intent to continue to investigate and look to permit some level with some restrictions of cannabis businesses. And we heard from members of the community at that meeting that it was sending the wrong signal. They raised a lot of good concerns. There was one that really rung true for me, and that was that the timing of the state's regulatory process could set in motion an ability for it could set in motion a process where we didn't have rules in place to accommodate certain businesses that we might otherwise be intending to allow eventually. And as a result, in the first wave of approvals, those folks could have been shut out of the process. And we heard a lot about the state's, what the statute calls a micro business, but they're essentially small businesses with a very local focus. And the hearing from those members of the community, their businesses would really be adversely impacted. We decided to give it a shot to really see if we could speed the process up. And so we did that. We held, and I'm sorry if folks didn't get a chance to weigh in, but we really tried to reach out to the community to take their temperature on issues related to housing cannabis businesses. What we heard, well, let me talk a little bit about process. We held 2 public hearings, one via Zoom, one in person, both of which were pretty well attended and had a lot of folks commenting. We had an email address, info@lambertvillenj.com, which was sent to me, and I've correlated all those responses. I'm pretty much up to date on that. We are sending out a survey, which we've completed. We are going to be meeting next week with members of the business community to get their input, all in a process to see what's important to folks. What we've heard so far, I think, had a couple of big themes that helped inform where we are tonight. The first is that, and perhaps not surprisingly, based on the vote in Lambertville, which was 82% in favor of legalization, was that there was support for some types of cannabis businesses in town. The focus of that really was heavily on retail. The statute defines 6 classes of cannabis entities, but almost exclusively what we heard was a focus on retail establishments. And the reasons were interesting to me. I mean, some folks had said that for medical reasons, they have a card, but they have to travel great distances. Sometimes folks aren't very well to travel, and there's a great inconvenience and a lack of access for folks. We heard folks that are interested in the tax revenue, that it's available under the law, and so forth. But again, a real strong focus on retail. Another theme that really came through to our work group was a preference for small businesses. As I said, the statute defines something that's called a micro business under the law, and there's detailed requirements for eligibility for that. But the character of our town is not, big chain, entities for the most part. So there was a sense that small businesses or medium-sized businesses should be given some level of preference. And conveniently, the statute does have this idea of a micro business. Another theme we heard was that it was reasonable to have some restrictions on those businesses. And the kinds of things the themes that we heard were, maybe it's perhaps like a liquor license, regulated like a liquor business. There seemed to be some support for exclusion, or a lot of support for exclusions on proximity to schools. There was hours. Folks didn't want these businesses operating through the morning and so forth. So anyway, those are the theme of appropriate restrictions was something that came through in our input. We also heard concerns. There was folks that outright just don't want any of these businesses here, but they were, I would say so far anyway, a very small minority of the voices that we heard. One of the things that we talked about was traffic and parking concerns. Both of those kind of cut both ways. If there's too much traffic, it can be, we've seen this on weekends and so forth, it can be a problem. More traffic is good for local businesses too. Parking, we do have challenges with parking in Lambertville. Parking also helps with their meter revenue, honestly. But we don't want a situation where we're choking and clogging the town. So we talked about that. One of the hard things we don't control our fate completely because the number and location of licensed entities is determined by the state, not by us, not by our brethren municipalities. So it's something that we just have to live with. If we're the only game in town for a wide geographic area, there's a danger that would create some traffic problems. Probably not a likely result based on the licensure, how that we think they'll be awarded, but it's something that we have to be mindful of and cautious about. One of the interesting ideas we heard was to have more of an appointment process where it encouraged businesses to use the appointment process. But anyway, that's kind of what we heard from the community. Again, support for certain types of cannabis businesses, a real focus on making sure that retail establishments were available, at least to try to file with the state. Preferences, some level of preference for small businesses, certain level of restrictions, and then there were concerns around this. So with that, we set our professionals at work on a draft ordinance, which is before you tonight. This was we were changing this up through today. So we should be clear about what we're voting on tonight was the most recent version that was provided to us. And I'll outline some of the key decisions, and Emily can take over with some other elements, because I know it's hard to listen to somebody talking on a phone. But a couple of the key decisions, the points that we made in developing this were, first, to permit retail cannabis stores, but to cap the number at 4, with 2 permitted in the central business district, 1 in the C2 zone, and 1 in the C3 zone. We don't want 47 cannabis retail outlets in the city that we don't think that would serve the city well. I think we thought up to 4 would be appropriate. 4 also, and again, it depends how many the state allows. If there's just 1, it does focus traffic in one area. If there's more than 1, it does disperse traffic a little bit better. A preference that at least 2 of the 4 meet the definition of a microbusiness. We do want to have controls around signage. We don't want flashing neon lights and pop signs. So the draft, the ordinance before us tonight, does have sign controls. There's surveillance cameras that are required by the state law. Those could be, those are addressed in the ordinance. We did put 500 feet from schools. If you do 1,000 feet, as some folks had talked about, it would really sort of create a de facto ban through much of the city. There would be some very small carved out areas that would be outside those zones. Again, if the state were to say it has to be 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 feet from the school, there would be a sort of preemption kind of concept, and the state requirement would prevail over any kind of city requirement if it was more rigorous. We would not permit in single-family dwellings or townhouses. There is an opportunity to tax this for municipalities. Municipalities generally don't have broad taxing authority over things really other than hotels and our property tax. But we would exercise would choose to do a 2% tax on those transactions. For now, the ordinance has no consumption areas. You can have indoor and outdoor consumption areas. We just didn't feel like we knew enough, so the potential for wafting smoke and odor problems and so forth were a concern. So for now, we have no consumption areas. And I want to stress lastly that this is a start of a dialogue. The ordinance does ban the other 5 types. That is not to say that we're not interested. It's just we chewed off as much as we could and focused on what people seem to care about most, and that was retail outlets. It may be that delivery makes sense here. Some of the warehousing facilities and some of those other things require very large facilities. Some are, like football stadium sized endeavors, which we clearly couldn't handle here. I don't think we're going to be attractive to many of those kinds of businesses, but that's not to say that it couldn't happen here. It's just we need to take a deeper dive into that. By acting tonight, allowing retail, we allow those folks that really spoke to us to start out of the gate and get applications in should the state act promptly, while maintaining some flexibility to continue to look at these other types of businesses and consider them more fully. If you don't ban them in this, for example, they're permitted with no restrictions. I don't think anybody wants that. We just didn't feel like we could get to those other 5 forms that were of less interest. So that's the outline of the process. and a very broad outline of some of the key decision points that are reflected in the ordinance before us, and happy to answer questions. I know Emily is there too, and Steve worked on this with me. Steve, I don't know if you want to start by adding anything.
I think you've pretty much covered it. The dialogue between us and the public had some great ideas, and we incorporated where we could to move forward on the retail licensing in the city. There was many concerns that large corporations would come in and kind of capture the market, and that's why the micro licenses, two of those, 50% of what we approved are for micro businesses. So I think that was based on a lot of feedback we had gotten from the public on that.
Councilman Sanders, do you mind if I pop in for a second?
Not at all, man, go ahead.
Thank you. So just to remind folks about how this is gonna work, we are under a deadline by the state of New Jersey to pass something by August 22nd. This is our first reading and introduction. The text of this will be available to the public within 24 hours. After that, it'll go to planning board review tomorrow. It'll be discussed at the planning board. And then finally, we'll have a public hearing, as well as a second reading, on our July 22nd meeting. So that gives us enough time, if there's significant public pushback, to go back and revise and still get something, hopefully by the deadline. So with that, are there any questions from the council, from the public? If so, you can go over to the podium.
I just have a quick question.
Oh,
Please
sure.
come forward. I'm just gonna be there. So I just want to confirm, Councilman Sanders, that the text we're voting on tonight includes the changes that I think the city planner sent us late morning, correct? Because I don't think it's necessarily reflected in the printed copy.
Yes, we'll be
Okay.
voting on the final copy of that draft.
Okay.
And I do just want to say, our planner, I know Councilman Sanders and Councilman Stanton worked really hard on this particular process. There was a lot of public input, but Emily also helped collate as well as Bill actually collated a series of municipal ordinances where they were not choosing neither to ban nor to just fully accept whatever the state was going to allow, to get to a place where we were really looking at sort of, at least what is for now, best practices for municipalities that are interested in cannabis sales and with some restrictions.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who worked on this.
Yeah, just a very quick, there's a work group of folks that volunteer their time and a lot of time around this effort. And thank you for, I didn't mean to exclude Emily, but she was instrumental in this whole process. So I appreciate her work on this.
Okay, Mr. Mensch, you have a comment?
So thank you all for, I salute this is fantastic. So I just want to say thank you. Is the 2% number determined, Mike Mensch, 25 Ferry Street? Is the 2% number determined, or did we choose the 2% treasury tax rate?
Mr. Sanders?
Yeah, the statute permits up to a 2% tax. We have chosen to, I suspect a lot of towns will, suspect to do it. So, yes, in theory, it could be less, if I heard your question correctly, but we've chosen the full 2%.
I agree. I was hoping you would say that we could have gone higher. What's the likelihood of delivery? Just curious, because I've heard that idea as well. It sounds very compelling. Is there a chance that delivery will be incorporated?
So, and Mr. Sanders, you can also answer this question. As my understanding of what the state says thus far is that even if a town bans cannabis businesses in their community, they cannot ban delivery. The idea is that cannabis will be accessible to every New Jerseyan, either by local businesses or by delivery. So delivery is coming to Lambertville. It may just not be a business that's in Lambertville. And I don't think actually, in my personal opinion, a delivery business would make a heck of a lot of sense here. You need a large logistics space like a warehouse in order to make a delivery company work.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, good evening, Alicia Lemon, 101 East
Excuse
Merritt.
me, is your mic on? Is the mic- yeah. Thanks so much.
Let me just get a little taller. Bring it down, all right, is this okay?
Yes.
Thank you. 101 East Land Track, so to echo, thank you so much for pulling this together from the initial ban ordinance to having a proposal. I just wanted to clarify, so this does not preclude us from adding class 1 or 2 licenses in the future, because I think that's a gap. I mean, I think that would be helpful for the city as well. So I see, Steve, you're saying,
Right, Lord, it doesn't stop us from expanding anything, correct?
Yeah, my understanding is that the law would permit us to expand. So whether it's to allow certain cannabis businesses, say we decide to act in November or whatever, to allow some other form of business or to expand the number, we probably could do that. I have to seek some advice from council maybe on that. But I didn't see anything in the statute which would prevent us from tweaking what were either the class 5 that we're permitting through this process, or to modify the other classes and allow them to draw.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
I was just saying, you know, if we do act to permit, then I think we're locked in for a certain period. If we fail to act by August 22nd, we're locked into permitting. But if we act to ban tonight and to allow retail, we can modify that, is my understanding.
That's also my
Yeah.
understanding.
Yeah, and I do want to thank, by the way, Alicia, I think it was Alicia Lerman, who had some really insightful and thoughtful comments. So I appreciate you spent on, I mean, you really went through a lot of this stuff, really appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Jessie Villers, 13 Lambert Lane. So I wanted to ask a question specifically about, the banning of consumption loans, for retail licenses. Just because it could create a messy situation for like renters in town, patients who rent, and aren't able to smoke at their own apartments. Also people from Pennsylvania who are inevitably going to be coming across the bridge and purchasing legal cannabis within our city, who then legally cannot bring it back across the bridge. And so I was just wondering, in order for people who want to consume legally and not risk their lease, what are we gonna do to be able to like provide a safe space? Because we're allowing the legal sales of it, but for certain people in town, they won't have a place to legally and safely consume it. I know we're a town where people do, we do need to ban public consumption, like it shouldn't be out in just public space, and that's a smart thing to put in the, but people do that, and so we need to look like, I'm concerned about how we're gonna provide a space for those patients that aren't able to smoke within their own apartments.
I think it's a really interesting question, Councilman. I'll allow you to answer as well. I know this, I think that this ordinance in particular is gonna be a work in progress, as is the regulations throughout the state. This allows us to do what you've asked us to do here, which is to not ban. We will, I think, from the Councilman Sanders' last answer, we don't expect this to be a one and done. We're going to see how the state, the CRC comes back with their own regulations, how the rollout happens, and then as these issues arise, we'll continue to come forth as a council to try and address them. But for this particular ordinance, we're doing what we need to do to get in by the August 22nd deadline.
I so appreciate that. I also.
Yeah, and just add, I mean, it's a really interesting and good point. There's certain things that we're gonna be able to solve for, and there's certain things that we're not gonna be able to solve for. You know, there are folks that are worried that consumption by out-of-state folks can lead to folks, you know, getting back in the cars, and so forth. So, you know, there was also some concern about, you know, the areas where this might occur and what its impact on its neighbors might be. So, you know, issues around odor control and things like that, we, you know, we just didn't feel like we had quite enough to allow it at this point, but it's something that I think, you know, our mayor deserves and warrants some further contemplation. But the point you make is a very good one. I just don't, it's hard to solve for everything in these kinds of ordinances. You know, presumably some folks will have friends in town and might be able to go to places where they can do this, but I certainly, we're aware of the problem. We just weren't quite sure how to resolve for it in the time that we were given.
Sounds like an open invitation to Councilman Sanders' house.
Well, I do understand it's a really tight time period, and I also wanted to say thank you so much to the city council and its working committee. Y'all have done so much during this summer, and I really appreciate all the hard work everyone's put in. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Christopher Tanev. I live at 43 Bridge Street, apartment 2. Thank you all for holding this meeting and for your work on this project. My question is, you mentioned, Councilman Sanders, restrictions on signage. And my question is, how do these restrictions on signage compare to any restrictions that might be placed on signage of places that sell alcohol or caffeine?
Yeah, Emily can probably speak specifically to the signage restrictions. I would say, well, the honest answer is I don't know the answer to the question off the top of my head. I do know that there has been a concern at the statewide level when the state regulated medicinal cannabis and had specific restrictions on the signage and the type of signage in a way that I'm sure doesn't exist for other types of things like alcohol or lottery cards or whatever, whatever you want to draw comparisons to. So that concept of restrictions on signage, you know, came out a little bit from the medicinal ATC regulations, you know, again, this is our, you know, our first whack at this. You know, I do expect this to be a work in progress, and I'm sure this world will evolve, and the signage rules may evolve with it. But yeah, I don't know the answer to the, like, how it compares to what we require currently for alcohol. Maybe Emily, you may be more familiar with that.
If I can actually also further answer that question, the city of Lambertville actually has extremely strict signage regulation already, not just for particular substances, but for all of our businesses. In fact, you know, we have had multiple conversations this year because during COVID, we relaxed our enforcement specifically around neon signage, which is very clear in our ordinance. We are ending that relaxation as we speak. We are also ending our relaxation around sandwich board signage. Both of those, as well as several other sort of board approval, the process of board approval to get a sign approved in the city of Lambertville is in some ways extremely arduous, and I think that's how it should be. When we add visual clutter to our community, we're lessening the historic value of our town. And so, you know, I know that many members of our communities, while they may support cannabis, would not support, you know, a neon sign-filled front window. In fact, that was one of the ways in which the city leaned on not allowing a vape shop in our community through the planning board process only a few months ago. So I will state here that, you know, as somebody who sits on this board, as well as somebody who sits on the planning board and regularly attends Historic Preservation Council meetings, the likelihood of signage getting passed, regardless of what substance you're selling, that is what might be considered noxious to our historic value and character of the community, is very unlikely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I'm gonna move This was an informal public hearing. Again, the actual public hearing, and thank you again, Councilman Sanders, for helping us answer those questions. The formal public hearing and second reading of this, particular, ordinance will be on July 22nd. We'll also be reviewing this with the planning board on July 7th. Can I get a motion to introduce on first reading ordinance number 16, 2021?
So,
Councilman Stegman for the first,
Second.
Council President Taylor for the second. Can I get a roll call vote?
Councilwoman Lambert.
I'd just like to thank Councilman Sanders, Stegman, Councilman Sanders and Stegman, and also City Planner Emily Goldman, and all the members of the community for doing a great job. And I'm voting yes.
Councilman Sanders,
Yes.
Councilman Stegman,
yes.
Council President Taylor,
Yes.
Mayor Paul.
Yes. Okay. We have a couple of updates. Councilman Sanders, would you like to speak about the police pipeline? Would you like me to, since we're, you're on the phone?
Yeah, I'll take a quick crack at it, and if I miss something, certainly let me know. You know, our Pace Pipeline Committee has been around, I think, since 2016, and we have been meeting regularly throughout the year. We'll be meeting shortly to look at the recent Supreme Court decision. So on June 29th, at the end of the last term, the Supreme Court issued a decision that said that the Penny's Pipeline can seize land in the state of New Jersey for its construction. It was a 5-4 decision, and it was interesting because it wasn't split along normal ideologic lines of liberals and conservatives, kind of a battle between fossil fuel interests and state rights. But the majority opinion said that the federal government can deputize entities like the Penny's Pipeline to seize land under the federal government's eminent domain rights. The dissenting justices wrote that the eminent domain power belongs to the United States, not the Penny, not the private company like Penny's. Obviously, this was disappointing for those of us who have been fighting against this. If we had prevailed, if the state of New Jersey had prevailed in this hearing or this matter, the owners of the Penny's Pipeline had said that the pipeline would likely not be built. So it could have been a knockout punch. It wasn't, but this is like a race with many hurdles, and there are some pretty formidable hurdles here in front of them. So they still have to get approval on their revised application from FERC. They still have to go before the DRBC, and they still have to go before the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection for clean water permits. And none of those are going to be easy tasks. So this is not the end. We may have lost this small battle, but we have to make sure that these hurdles continue to be difficult, and that's what the committee is going to be working on as the next steps.
Okay, thank you, Councilman. I also want to make an announcement here. I know it's not on our council update list, but Council President Taylor and I have been working on putting a plan together for the next steps for the Clausen property. We've been working with the chairs of the CAT. We're hoping to be able to present that to the council for their review before our next council meeting. And then after that, to the public for what our next steps are to ensure that by the end of the year, we have a site plan that's available to the public that has a lot of public input on how we're going to be using that space. So we are on track, hopefully, to present that to the council in the next several weeks before our July 22nd meeting for review. Are there any other announcements from or discussion points from members of council?
Just one question, can we clarify, there's a question from a member of the public in email today, and then there's also, I think something missing in the updates regarding public restrooms. So what is the final determination of when these will be available?
1 to 8. So this building is open Monday through Wednesday from 9 to 4. Anybody can use it then. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday from 1 to 8. I've had to try and define who is going to be the person to unlock the door.
Okay.
Yes,
So we may just want to,
it'll go out tomorrow and
Tuesday,
that,
yeah.
or Thursday in the email.
Thursday.
okay, thanks.
And I think also we've been working with members of the, help me out here, the Chamber of Commerce to ensure that that gets out to their businesses so that they know to send folks down. If people are. We're going to be having ongoing budget hearings. These will be available from, their presentation from, department heads. They'll be available online for review the day after they happen. We had one today, we'll be having one July 8th, at 2:30. And then there'll be at least one more, so that we can get sort of each of our department heads in to do their, to basically go over what their requests are. Those will all be available, and there's an expectation that every member of council will review those prior to, our budget presentation. The convenience center hours are July 7th from 3 to 5, and Saturday, July 10th from 9 to noon, July 14th. Make sure you guys bring your photo IDs. We've got Sparkle Week information going out in the Lambertville Matters, and all open for public comment. Hearing none, can I get a motion to close, the meeting? Councilman Lambert? Second. Councilman Taylor, all in favor? Aye. Thank you so much.
Aye.
Thank you, Councilman Sanders.
Wait, you all?
Because it's one of these rare things where there's another